Hello everyone and welcome to today's session on how to prepare for a virtual interview. My name is Hannah Kelly. I'm the GetAHEAD coordinator at AHEAD. So what we're going to cover today is first we'll have an overview of competency-based interviews. So we'll look at some tips and tricks around that and what you need to know generally for any interview that will be competency-based. And then we'll look more specifically at virtual interviews and the preparation and what you have to do for during and stuff like that. So live caption is available. CCs are at the bottom of your screen. So today's session, it's a safe space for you to explore and learn. I want you to be able to maximize your performance, whether that's eventually in a face-to-face interview or virtually. We're all getting used to this kind of new way of interviewing, and this new way, I suppose, of even delivering workshops is different for us too. So we want you to feel at ease and confident about virtual interviews, so get a little bit more comfortable with what it's going to look like. And what to expect, and then we want to address any queries or concerns that you have as well. So we'll start off with competency-based interviews. So the most important thing to know about competency-based interviews is firstly, you need to know yourself. So look at your skills, your strengths, weaknesses, your values and your goals. So you want to match these up to what the employer is looking for, what the specific job role is, and looking at this as well will help you know if this is a good job fit for you. So do your values align with the company's values? Do your skills and strengths play into what the role is looking for? And are there any weaknesses that you think might be a challenge, and how would you address these? And what are your goals maybe in this role or for the next few years within the company? Maybe it's a good idea to kind of have that in mind. So competency-based interviews, I suppose, first of all, we should address what is a competency. It's basically a skill, an ability, or a piece of knowledge that you have. So some examples there are organizational skills, teamwork, leadership, IT skills, and planning. So I know some of you will have civil service interviews coming up, and if that's the case for you, what you should do is look back on any notes or job descriptions or the job ad that you got. There should be tips and tricks within that into what they're looking for. So it's not really going to be a surprise to you what questions are going to be asked of you or what competencies is going to be looked for at an interview. It will be somewhere on the job description, so make sure to really read through that. If you don't have it to hand, so if you forgot to maybe download it or take a copy of it while you're applying for a job, what you can do is email the company and let them know that you need a copy of it, or if it is a WAM opportunity, give us an email and we'll be able to send you that job description because there will be some indication of what type of competencies they'll be looking for, and often you'll be told in advance what competencies they will be interviewing for, generally for interviews as well. So know yourself is really important. So when we look at these competencies, you have to know how that fits in to your own skill set, your own experience, things that you can relate it back to, and know your CV as well. So it's really important that you can relate back to what's on your CV. So people are going to, in an interview, an employer is going to bring up things on your CV and they'll want you to relate back to those experiences. So try and make sure that the examples you're given of these competencies relate back to what's on your CV. In regards to knowing yourself, it's a question that's you can almost guarantee is going to come up in an interview is, tell me about yourself. I think it's a question we all dread because you're like, oh, it's a little bit awkward. I think it's very Irish of us not to want to, boast about ourselves or whatever. But it's a great opportunity for you to be able to, settle yourself with the first question, give an indication of what your values are, what you stand for, and some really important pieces of information about yourself that you want the employer to know about you. So then when you're preparing your examples, what you should look at is, when and where did you achieve this, so that there's some context. What did you do or what did you hope to do? What the results were and how is that relevant to the job. So you should always be bringing it back to how that is relevant to the current opportunity that you're interviewing for. So there is an approach that you should follow in competency-based interviews, and and it's something that will keep you on track and make sure that you're kind of covering everything that the employer is looking for. So a skill or competency-based interviews are to assess what you can do, and this style of interviewing is really kind of mainstream at this point, especially with virtual interviews. It will be quite common. They're going to generally ask you about 4 to 6 different key skills or competencies. These can be like communication skills, interpersonal skills, leadership skills. Using this approach, you'll be able to get your full kind of example out and really illustrate what they're looking for. So to go through it, so the S, situation, give background and set the scene. So, this is really giving some context to what the situation or event maybe that you're planning. You want to give, some backgrounds on that. So this could be, where you were working at the time, or maybe it's a college assignment or something that you were doing, so you want to be able to reflect back on that. Then the task, so this is, the actual problem or issue that had to be resolved, or the task that you were completing. So maybe it was a report or a group work project, or maybe it was something went wrong in the organization and you had to be the one to resolve that. The action is then more specifically about you, so what you did in regards to the task, and what challenges you had to go overcome. So it's important here, if it was part of group work, that's absolutely fine to use that as an example, but on the action point you should really be focusing in on what your own part was in the resolving of the problem, or in the event, or whatever the case may be, for your example. And then arguably one of the most important things then is about the results. So being able to reflect back on, what you were happy with in regards to the outcomes, what was positive or negative, what you've learned and what you would do differently. And I think the kind of tendency here can be to go, oh, I don't want to be negative at all, so I'll just say all went perfect, and not really mention any negatives. But actually it's quite a good idea to be able to reflect back and talk about what you would have done differently, because it gives you it gives an employer an insight that you're able to learn from mistakes, and you're adapting and learning as you go, really. So it's definitely not a negative thing to mention something that maybe didn't go perfectly that you would do differently next time. But it is important that if you are going to talk negatively about an employer, a company that you used to work for, or an individual that you worked with, you shouldn't name any names, and it should not feel like you're kind of pointing the finger at anyone, rather than just sharing the experience and sharing what you learned from it. So that's kind of the difference there. What I would recommend is that, obviously, the people might not have access to a printer to print out their CV or their cover letter or the job application, but what I would do is write your key points in regards to the STAR approach. So maybe which competencies, and just a quick note on what situation you're going to be talking about, so you can bring back to that STAR approach when you're asked for it. Just if you're a type of person that would need or benefit from having notes, I think that would be a really good thing. So a tip there. And do try these answers out on your friends beforehand, your friends or family. It's a good idea just to get feedback on how they think it went, because sometimes if we are too close to a situation, like too close to the kind of example that you're given, it makes sense to us, but maybe to someone else who wasn't around at the time it wouldn't. So ask your family and friends what they think, and be open to their opinions and their insights. So moving more specifically now onto virtual interviews, and what kind of particular advice we'd have for a virtual interview as opposed to any other type of interview. So there are many different ways that an employer can conduct a virtual interview, but generally speaking, you'll need access to a camera and a microphone. So your smartphone may be all you need to use, or you might need a laptop or computer. But it's a good idea to firstly try these out beforehand, and make sure it all works, and then find out what platform you'll be using, and make yourself familiar with it. So whether it's Zoom, Google Meets, Hangouts, WebEx, Teams or Skype. And if you do have to download anything in advance, so if there's anything that you need, um, you know, as in you need an account or something, make sure you're doing that prior to your interview slot, because the last thing you want to do is you know, be late for the interview because you're still downloading something, and you know that will mean that you're all flustered, and it also doesn't look great to be not, it looks like you're not prepared for the meeting, I suppose. So make sure you've done that in advance. And do ask for a trial run if you've never used the technology before, but I would recommend that you first have a look at it yourself, practice with friends, and it's important as well. I know a lot of us will be using right now these platforms for, you know, family quizzes or friend quizzes with friends, or, you know, just hanging out with people online. And that's fine, but do make sure, I know we all, I know I do it myself, change our names to like a silly nickname, or it might even be inappropriate. Just make sure you're switching that back so that it has your first name and your last name, because you don't want to come across like that's a bad first impression to give. Um, and also it might mean that they don't allow you into the interview because they're not recognizing the name coming up in the waiting room or something like that. So do make sure that you have your first and last name, and the same goes for if you're using an email address to set up an account. Make sure it's an appropriate email, um, like you would for a job application. So yeah, so looking at accommodations, there are a few different accommodations that would be maybe similar, but what you should do is look at, you know, is this going to be different from a face-to-face interview? Maybe you're a person who doesn't require any accommodations for a face-to-face interview, but moving to a virtual space, you could actually benefit from getting some accommodations. So it's worth kind of exploring this beforehand, and making sure that you kind of asked for everything that you need prior to time. So, for example, does this platform interfere with your assistive technology? So if you're a screen reader, highlight this to them. Let them know that you might have some difficulty in accessing the platform. And then, will you require extra time? So for some people, maybe they don't need extra time for a face-to-face interview, but because it's a little bit different in a virtual space, that you could actually benefit from it for a virtual interview, and that's fine. So maybe explore that a little bit. If you need an interpreter, so make sure again you say this to them in advance. As soon as possible is really the best time, because a lot of time might be needed to arrange an interpreter, because interpreters are also working remotely now. So it's a good idea to kind of, as soon as you know that you're going to be interviewed, just let them know that you're going to require an interpreter. And also about figuring out how exactly that's going to work, like on the platform, can they pin the interpreter so that you can see them, or is it going to be in a separate video links, things like that. So it's worth fleshing that out with them beforehand. If you need captioning, so captioning is available on some of these platforms. Google Meets and Teams do have auto-generated captions, but if not, some of the platforms don't. But if they don't, pretty much all of them do have a chat feature. So what you can do is ask the employer to relay questions into the chat box. And what I mean by that is, um, instead of having, you know, captioning, what they can do is type in their questions that they want to ask you, and then you either type back or you can verbally answer those questions as a kind of a guide for what they're asking you. You know, so there is lots of different creative ways you can do this, and it's kind of, if you have an idea that you think might work best for you, feel free to bring this up with an employer and say, I think this is how it'll work best for me. We're all kind of adapting to using these platforms, and and the employer is also adapting to interviewing online in a virtual space. So I'm sure they'll be open to your ideas on how to support you best. And then finally, if there's any other information that you want to disclose to an employer, like if you think that'll help you perform at your best, just let them know. So this could be because maybe you have a difficulty, a visual impairment, and you might not look at the camera because you're blind, and or maybe you're not entirely comfortable with the camera and you're a little bit nervous, or maybe you're on the spectrum and you're maybe worried that you're going to be fidgeting or not able to look at the camera. and you're worried that this might affect their perception of you and might affect your performance, you can let them know that if you're comfortable with it. If you think that might affect your performance in the interview, there's no problem in letting them know in advance, and that might put you at ease a little bit as well, and knowing that that's not going to play into how you perform on the day. So where to set up? If possible, obviously we are working in less than ideal circumstances right now, and not everyone is going to have the perfect setup. Indeed, I don't think all employers will have the perfect setup, but if possible, find a quiet and private space, and let the others in your household know if you're living with other people that you're going to be, doing an interview at a certain time, so that they can keep the noise levels down at that time and make sure that they're not coming into the room interrupting you. That kind of thing settles you a little bit as well. Have a neutral background. So this is important because as you can see behind me, I just have a white wall, and then I have a poster from and a head poster on my background, so you can't see anything else in the space, so you're not really getting any other information from my background. But if you have a very busy background, so maybe you have like your bedroom's really messy in the background, or you have a really big poster, or you have a flag or some sort of religious item or something like that, it's given them some kind of information about you outside of what you're telling them. So that can influences people's decisions. So unconscious bias is the thing. So the less distractions, the less visual noise, the better. It lets kind of the employer just focus on you and the information that you're disclosing to them about, your relevant experience and stuff like that. So that's what you really want the focus to be on, rather than your background. So check your internet in advance. Obviously, if you have a weaker connection, there's only so much that you can do, but if you are having trouble with your internet, or it's something that you're worried about, ideally sit up close to the modem. So set up in the same room as it, or on the same floor or something like that, if that's possible. And if it is possible, if you're worried about internet connection, if you're close enough to actually plug in your laptop to the modem with an Ethernet cable, that will ensure that you kind of have the best chance at having the connection working. But there's no problem in letting them know in advance if you are worried about broadband connection. Like, that's not going to be your fault, and it's something they're going to be understanding of, that there might be issues. I think, the broadband in the country, everyone seems to be on the internet pretty much all the time now, but it's working from home, so it can be a problem for most people. So I wouldn't be afraid to kind of let them know in advance if it is something that you're worried about. It's also a good note, if it is something you're worried about, to also go back and tell the people in your household that you're going to be using the internet for an interview at this time, and asking people maybe not to be on other devices just for that, half an hour, 40 minutes, to give you the best shot at kind of having a good connection. So that's an idea as well for it. And then finally, leave time to get settled beforehand. So, give yourself 10-15 minutes. Make sure that you're all set up, you're not doing anything else on the computer, the door is closed, and stuff like that. And then as well, make sure you have a glass of water beside you. So obviously the employer generally in a face-to-face interview would bring a glass of water or something like that. So your throat obviously can get very dry if you're nervous or anything like that, so it's good to have a glass of water in front of you in case you need it. So then, preparing for a virtual interview, like I've kind of mentioned before, you should prepare your answers. So you should definitely have an idea of what you're going to say, and what kind of things you want to relate back to, what experiences you want to share in regards to your work experience. But don't read off a script. I think there can be kind of a temptation to just write everything out and have it in front of you, because the employer is not going to be able to see you anyway. So I suppose it might seem like a good idea to just write everything out that you want to say and then read off that. But I would advise you not to do that, because well, first of all, it's not going to read very natural if you're just reading off a script. it's not going to be very conversational. You're not going to be able to kind of read what the employer is looking for and bounce off their questions. And as well, you could very easily lose your spot. Like, it's very hard to read a chunk of text while you're, interviewing, and while you might be a bit nervous. So if you lose your spot, then your notes don't make any sense. So instead, if you are kind of interested in having a few notes in front of you, that's perfectly fine. But I would recommend you have little flashcards if possible, or just little pieces of paper with little bullet points to bring you back to a point that you want to make, rather than chunks of text that you want to read off. This will kind of be able to give you some pointers and go back to if you get lost, if you lose your train of thought, without actually having to have everything you know on one page. So research about the company. It's a great idea to look at the industry, at their competitors, what they've kind of been doing maybe in response to COVID-19, if they have any programs or responses that they've had. Maybe it's good to know these and be able to reference them. And then show a professional image. So as you would in a face-to-face interview, dress business casual is usually a good bet to go on, but whatever you feel most comfortable in as well. So you want to look, as you would go into a face-to-face interview. Not only does this kind of give off a good first impression, but it also means that you're kind of getting yourself in that work mode. You're putting yourself into a different space mentally by putting on the professional clothes. You're kind of ready for that type of environment, I suppose. So then what if things go wrong? I think the important thing to know here is that things might come up, and if they do, people are going to be understanding, the employer should be understanding. Again, we're all just kind of adapting to this working from home situation, and it's not an ideal circumstance. So people are kind of expecting there to be a few hiccups along the way. So don't worry too much about it. So some tips around that is, first of all, be patient. So if the employer has tech problems, again, they don't have maybe the ideal setup either. So things might go wrong on their end. And if they do, be patient, try not to worry about it too much. Be calm as well. So if something goes wrong, don't panic, try and assess the problem. If it is your internet connection, make sure that you're kind of letting the employer know if you're having this problem. So if you are finding that their maybe screen is freezing, or it's lagging a little bit, or the sound gets muffled for a second and you didn't understand the question, I would kind of really advise you to let them know that that's happening. So not to kind of just try and ignore it and move on. Do say, like, I actually didn't hear you there, or the connection seems to be going a little bit, and seeing if you can address that, so you can kind of take a pause for the interview for a second, and reassess what the problem is. If you are finding that you're having an issue with your own camera, so maybe your connection is dipping out and dipping back in, or you're having a bit of issues there with the sound and the video, it can be an idea to turn your camera off, because this might help with your connection. But make sure, if you are thinking of doing this, that you let the employer know, saying, I actually think that this could work better if I turn my camera off because the connection's not great, and see if they're happy with that. So make sure you kind of have a conversation with them about that before you kind of make that decision. And then have a contingency plan. Obviously, this is not going to be available to everyone. Not everyone is going to have the ability to do that, but if you do, make sure you have a second device to hand. So maybe if you're working off a laptop, have your phone ready to go, just in case something happens, and so that you can quickly kind of get it set up on the second device. And another thing is to make sure that your device is fully charged, because it's the video platforms and being on a video call can actually take up quite a good chunk of battery. So make sure that you're either using something while it's plugged in, or that it is fully charged up before you start, because the last thing you want is your device to die halfway through a interview, and then you're having to kind of, it sets it all off balance, and it could mean that you don't get to finish off that interview or something like that. It's also just not a great impression. So make sure that it's fully charged. And then, like I said, let the employer know if you're having any issues, or if you're concerned about any issues coming up beforehand. They should be very understanding about this. We're all kind of in the same boat here, so don't be afraid to kind of let them know if you are having issues or if you're worried about any issues coming up beforehand. Then for the closing, this is quite similar to how it would be in a face-to-face interview. So be prepared with questions to ask, as always, some relevant questions. It could be around, starting dates and stuff like that. It could be around, the possibility of onboarding virtually. So that might be the case for a lot of people who are interviewing at this stage. You could be facing working from home for the first couple of months or the first couple of weeks, and that kind of onboarding process. So you could ask questions around that, around how have they been navigating onboarding new employees virtually. Make sure you fully understand the position. So before you go, you should have a great understanding of exactly what they're looking for, and try and see if that fits for you. Ask for next steps in the process. So is there another interview process or anything else? And is there any delays because of COVID-19? So like I said, are they onboarding virtually, or are they kind of delaying that starting date until the employees are all back in the office? And then follow up after the interview, send a note to say, thanks for the interview, and if you have any further questions or anything, and then that they have your contact details there as well. So finally then, for next steps, keep an eye on the GetAHEAD website. So we are still currently recruiting with WAM opportunities. So do keep an eye on that website. There should be new stuff coming up all the time. And then Building the Future, I'm sure some of you might have heard of before. It's our annual careers fair. So it was actually due to take place this month in May, but obviously that can't go ahead. So we are looking at the possibility of putting that virtually. So keep an eye on our website for that as well. There should be more information on that soon. So thanks everybody for tuning in today, and I hope you got something out of that. Thanks.